gets back to your question about the parallels between Bitcoin and the internet itself. I think we're still in the picks and shovels stage where, I mean, the really early phase of the internet was laying down cable and having, mobile cell towers, everybody, right? The broadband capability that got built out in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s. Maybe we're not quite at that early stage, but that next phase of having the protocols get built and all of the interoperability getting built in so that you could start to actually build things that take advantage of the of high broadband and ubiquitous internet access that we've sort of been really enjoying for the last 10 or 15 years. I think we're not quite there yet. So to your question, I think Bitcoin companies are really still focused on infrastructure and laying down the guardrails or the maybe not the guardrails, but basically the infrastructure so that you can build maybe not like the degen, like those old D apps stuff. Maybe we're not going back to full blown Web3 land, at least in Bitcoin world. But we still want to be able to build companies that are not just about transacting with each other. We want to build companies that have other purposes, but where Bitcoin is infused into it, whether it's part of the payments infrastructure or using a Lightning, using the L2 and the Lightning Network to interact with individuals within a network. There's a bunch of different ways that you could use those techniques and those capabilities to enhance what are technically Bitcoin companies that aren't just about, borrowing and buying and transacting Bitcoin in and of itself. I'm excited about that. That's the phase that I want to see us get to soon.
Yeah, I'm so excited, and I do agree with you with where we are currently. There's like there's some people that say we are like 1990, 1995, 1998, wherever you draw that line. But most people tell me we are in before 2000. How do you see that? Like, if you had to overlay the internet adoption where we are right now with Bitcoin.
Let's see. So I'll just think out loud. So I'm going to dox myself. I was around before the internet and then through that early phase. Um, we're definitely past the point where the browser just gets introduced, right? I think we're maybe okay. So there's a couple of inflection points where high speed internet access started to basically the penetration of high speed internet access both for homes and for businesses happened. I'm actually not a scholar of this, but roughly 2000-ish, something like that. It's like 5 years in, maybe, plus or minus a couple of years. I think we're probably just now getting past that. And I think maybe emblematic of that would be the ETFs. Basically, it gets adopted by institutions, and now the likelihood that the whole thing sort of collapses under its own weight sort of goes away. And so if you sort of it's not a perfect analogy or parallel, but once everybody has access to the internet and a reliable, stable access on a desktop, then you can really do some interesting things. And then, because you have an audience there, you start to build things to do within that platform. The next phase, again, without sort of holding myself out as a scholar, I think you could argue that the mobile phone, and in particular the iPhone, with that harnessed the power of a mobile browser for the first time. I mean, trying to get online in those early, the BlackBerry days before that was a huge pain in the ass. But the iPhone was a transformative device that opened up a ton of not just opportunity, but it made things possible that hadn't been possible before. And I think we're right on the cusp of that, where I don't know how long it's going to be, and I'm not exactly sure what it looks like, but I think that where the ETFs and sort of the attendant other things that are happening, whether it's the strategic Bitcoin reserve or the stuff that is making it here to stay, is going to make people emboldened and empowered to start to build the stuff on top of that we'll start to see in the coming years.
Yeah, I
I
also
don't know what
think
it looks like, but I think it's coming.
It's really a fun place to be right now because we have all the things in place. We have the ETFs, we have the strategic Bitcoin reserve, so like all the game theory things that we have hoped for the last 16 years that companies buy, high net worth individuals buy, countries buy, the big
Hmm.
ETFs are here. All of that we now have, and so now we
Right.
just kind of wait and see how
Yeah.
fast those buckets will fill. It's a point in time, Bitcoin in 2025, where it's so obvious if you educate yourself, and still so many people don't get it. So if you look back at like 2012, it was not obvious. We haven't gone through
Right.
block size wars. There's
Oh
not an
no.
ETF
Right.
out. There's like the president is not talking about it. Like 2012, it was way more a gamble because there was a lot of questions still in the room that just weren't answered. Now we got 90% of all questions kind of answered,
Yeah.
and still 97, 98%, whatever the number is, of people have no clue about Bitcoin. Even a lot of Bitcoiners who hold like $1,000 on Coinbase, they still have no clue. If you only have
Right.
$1,000 on
Yeah.
Coinbase, you don't have a clue about Bitcoin.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in a mode right now where, on Bitcoin X, like that in Spaces and on X, there's a ton of um let's call it noise about how few whole coiners there will ever be, right? There's only 21 million coins. That literally means that there can only be 21 million theoretical whole coiners, and it's way smaller than that, obviously. And aren't we awesome for having a whole coin? Those people who do. Um, I'm looking forward to getting on the other side of that discourse. It can't happen until what you just described goes away, where most people don't even get it. There's people who never heard of it, and there's people who don't understand why it's important and don't get it even in the context of that. I think we do have to continue to educate and bring people along and let them know why Bitcoin is special. Well, a thing that popped in my head, I have two things to say. Thing that popped in my head as you were talking a moment ago was, apropos of the how long we've come over those past 12 years. I think we had to go through the shitcoin era, the pump and dump era. I think it was inevitable that those altcoins, those shitcoins would come up and pump and dumps would happen, rugs would happen, people would fuck around with ordinals and NFTs and what have you. And no judgment, it's just not my thing for all of the reasons that we have seen over the past 4 or 5 years. They are not Bitcoin. There is no second best. Bitcoin is money. Those things are not money. Bitcoin is decentralized. None of those other things are decentralized. And on and on and on. And I think as those go from being mantras and slogans to being principles that everybody basically understands, then we can get to the other side of it. And the people who 5 years from now will be hearing about Bitcoin for the first time and get educated, they're not going to be able to buy a whole coin, but it's not going to matter because one coin is going to be worth so much that even if you have a tenth of a coin, if you have, pick a number, 500,000 sats, that's going to be a really meaningful thing for you and your family going forward. You just won't have taken advantage of the early days, certainly the early days, let alone the 2024, 5, 6 era.
It's a super interesting conversation when we think about how people actually get adopted, like how no, not get adopted, but how people actually adopt Bitcoin. So when we look at, I don't know, the car, most people don't really understand how a car works and what the engine is looking like. Most people know how to drive a car, but not how the car actually works. Same with the internet. Most people can send WhatsApp messages, can post on Instagram, and do a video call. Like most people
Hmm.
in the internet can do that. But how many people can actually describe what's underneath with the TCP/IP network, with all those things? And I'm wondering often how many people do how many people really need to understand Bitcoin in order for it to work. Maybe
Yeah.
80, 90, 95% of people just have an app on their phone where they send money and they know like, oh, this Bitcoin thing is superior. They don't really know why. They
Right.
just know how to use it, and the same way people know, yeah, it's more efficient to drive a car than ride a horse. They don't have to explain
Right.
why. It's just
That's
so
right.
much better. So I, I'm wondering how long this podcast even needs to be there before we hit a mass adoption where most people actually already get Bitcoin without really understanding the revolution behind it. I'm really curious. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I definitely think that it, like so many inventions or discoveries before, whether it's electricity itself and then leading to the electrical grid in the United States, or to use your car example, the first couple of cars, you couldn't really go anywhere because the roads were full of horses, right? Literally didn't want to scare the horses. But then at some point you have the international highways in the United States and, 65, 70 mile an hour speed limits, and nobody would even. Anyway, the point is it becomes adopted, and at some point nobody even thinks about it. It just is, and I don't know how long it'll take, um, but I don't think we're that far away. I think if you think about how complex, if you just think about starting with the white paper itself. And then what had to happen for us to get to where we are in 2025, with all of the sort of milestones along the way. I was thinking about this today as I was thinking about chatting with you, just how remarkable it is from when the white paper gets published to even just 4 years later. I mean, the price of Bitcoin, I'm not a scholar of it, but it stays relatively flat for a long time. But 4 years later, it was still going. And I'm curious. I mean, I'd like to see a history of this. Like, where did those nodes pop up, and how did whoever Satoshi was interacting with, how did that group start to spread the word in a way that made people get interested, even just interested to plug in a miner, right? Like that process is really interesting. And now to come back to your point, most people, like you said, 90, 95, 99% of people at some point will just know that there's this thing that happens called mining, and that more than 98% of all the Bitcoin that's ever going to exist has been mined already. And now we're just using the Bitcoin, and the miners are doing something to make us secure, and we can trust it. Most people they're just going to accept it for what it is. Um, and there's basically just take it for granted, not unlike taking the just back to the internet now. I certainly take it for granted, unless and until I'm disconnected from it, at a time when I don't want to be disconnected from it, whether it's on a plane or the damn cable modem goes out in the house. Um, it seems like you walk around like you just woke up from a nap or something for a bit, and it's fine. But my point is, you just take it so for granted that it's always there. And I think we will definitely get to the point where not just Bitcoin itself is that, but how we use it and how it gets infused and strengthens the financial system that we are beholden to now.
Yeah, it's so funny when you're all of a sudden somewhere and there's no internet or there's no electricity, and all of a sudden you're like, what am I doing? Like
Yeah.
I cannot look up on the internet what I should do now.
No,
So
exactly. Well, actually, apropos of that, I live in Los Angeles, and we had a couple of really terrible fires a couple of months ago as we're recording this. And my house was not directly affected by one of the fires, but I was a couple of sort of areas over, and we got evacuated. But it wasn't until like 12 hours later. But our power went out about 4 hours before the fire that was close to me started. And so my phone worked, but the entire house was dark, and it was like dusk. So the point is that I knew that a fire was happening because a couple of people called me, and I even drove up to a hill and I could see it. But it was far away. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to go to bed. It's no big deal. And then I got a call from a friend at like 5 in the morning saying, your neighborhood is getting evacuated. And the point is not, how scary that was, although it was, but yes, we get so we just take for granted the fact that, we can just hop online or turn on the TV, or literally have lights on as I'm putting clothes and stuff in a bag to bug out. Um, yeah, I'm not a prepper, but that's as close to wanting to be a prepper as I've been. Having a go bag and making sure that I've got my I've got my cold wallets available and taking with me, was kind of an interesting little experience for about half an hour that morning.
It's super interesting because it's like you want to prep for those things, but usually you need one big thing that happened to actually remind you how important this prep. Most people will not change if there's not like some pain coming or something
Right.
coming their way, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, like I should prep for that. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
good idea to do that. And yeah, it's the same way with self custody. And you with the Bitcoin advisory, so you're well aware of how few people actually do self custody,
Yeah.
and how people are scaring away from, oh, I don't want to do self custody. It's so interesting. Do you think self custody is something that can or will be mainstream? If we think about the car example, will there will there be is the car self custody, or is it like, oh, like, no, people will not self custody, and the mechanic will do the work and stuff like that? Like, how do you think about, I mean, maybe a better example is email servers in the early days of the internet. I hear it
Oh,
only
right.
from
Yeah.
people that tell me about it, because I was not, I was just like a few years old. People thought everyone will run their own email servers, and now everything is
Yeah.
on Google servers and Apple servers and stuff like that. Do you think self custody is like a wet dream of Bitcoiners, and it will be like only a small amount of people that actually do it, or is that something that will be mainstream?
Well, okay, so first of all, I haven't thought about this question before, but I think it's a terrific question, because it does touch on a couple of things that I have thought about lately. And so just to start with the fire example, I wasn't worried about leaving my Trezor or my ledger, none of my keys, right? My cold wallets. I didn't worry about taking them with me because I'm with the Bitcoin advisor and my stuff is in a vault, and I wasn't worried about the house burning down in the first place. But if it did, my Bitcoin is fine because I have a Thea vault and I also have an Unchained vault, and then the Bitcoin advisor has a key. So if I need to, I just go buy another Trezor, another Ledger, or whatever, and swap out the key. It's literally not a problem. And to build on that, and getting back to what you were saying a second ago, yeah, when you first have a car, you feel like you have to be able to maintain the car yourself. That was when I was growing up. That was a pretty common thing, especially among dads and sons. The idea of getting in, under the hood, and whether it's changing the oil or any of the other stuff that one does as a gearhead, um, that was really ubiquitous. But I don't know about you, but I wouldn't know what to do if I had to change a carburetor, or even change the oil on the car that I drive. It's a nice German car. I can put oil in and I can, top up some fluids, but I'm going to a specialist to deal with it. And so to come back to Bitcoin, one of the things that I've been thinking about alongside all of this, actually one more anecdote associated with the fires. There were stories in the couple of weeks in both of those big fires in LA um, of basically robbers going around to the places where the houses had burned down and taking the safes that were in the houses, under the assumption that there's valuables in there. And if you're a Bitcoiner, of course, you've got your seed phrase in there in some form, right? Essentially, you have to be your own bank if you're going to self custody. And a lot of Bitcoiners think that's the only way to be, and more power to them. But I also know that I didn't have a single worry about having access to my Bitcoin when I left my house that day. I actually did come back in and grab it just in case, my two keys, but I wouldn't have had to. And then if the house had burned down, that would have been the least of my worries. I'd, call Peter or Andy at the Bitcoin Advisor and have them, spin me up another, I'd tell them get a new key and I'm ready to swap it out. It's no problem at all. And the Bitcoin Advisor isn't the only service that does that, but it allows you to be your own bank, but without all of the attendant security problems where you've got to have, the metaphorical guard strapped with a Glock ready to take out the people who are coming to steal your Bitcoin. That is no longer a problem, let alone with time locking options and other things that are in the same category of things that keep you from being a single point of failure. So I definitely think that that is going to be more and more common, whether it's with a key agent or with time locking or other techniques that people have developed, for sure.
Yeah, self-custody, multi-signature is a game changer for Bitcoin. Without that, it would be such a hassle. If you only have one key, how do you protect it? And if someone comes to your house, especially someone that is known to have Bitcoin, you don't want to be in a situation where you can even access those Bitcoin right
Totally.
there and then. You want to have some layers of security of how hard it is. So how I do it, it's like there are different strategies. You have to have like a vault where maybe most of it is, and there's like it's really hard to get to. It's like you really want to get in a position where you maybe even want to have it so locked away that you have to spend time and miles to really get to that. And then there's like a world where you can easily get to it, because I have to pay Bitcoin. It's literally a very easily accessible world for me.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot on there. It's just like working capital where like it goes around. So it's super interesting to think about how this will be adopted. And now to the question, I think it will be. I have a high hopes that Bitcoin self-custody will be adopted. I've high hopes for it to be really mainstream adopted. Like when we think about what happens when Apple and Google discover Bitcoin and self-custody, they will develop amazing apps. And I always bring that example up, as Sailor also brought it up in my podcast actually, and I stole it from him. What happens if Apple actually encounters Bitcoin and self-custody? They want to have Bitcoin on their devices. So they develop the iPhones according to Bitcoin, and they will make sure you can sign transactions when you hold, I don't know, your iPhone with your Apple Watch together. And maybe if you want to be secure, iPhone, Apple Watch, and MacBook. And if you hold those three things together and you sign with them on the same time, then you can move your Bitcoin. And they can make basically a multi-signature with Bitcoin. They probably do multi-signature then with everything and stuff like that. Maybe you can then sign in your Google account with a Apple's multi-signature. Just thinking out loud now, but
Sure.
I think key management, and that's my most optimistic thing. Key management will be something very easy, and the same thing that is now with username and password, basically. So I don't know how much you agree with that, but that's how I hope it will be. Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast, and if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.